Hello everyone, welcome back. So, we have a Hu Tao rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? This is going to make some Hu Tao mains mold, but I cannot honestly in good conscience recommend her. Despite spreadsheet impact players thinking that Hu Tao is marginally stronger than her competitors, I just don't find her gameplay to be all that enjoyable, especially compared to those other characters. And Hu Tao mains themselves tend to have a reputation of being the most psychopathic people on the planet, so that doesn't help either. I feel like if you're on the fence about getting Hu Tao, I would lean towards not suggesting her at all. Now, to be fair, there is one kind of team very specifically that I have been enjoying Hu Tao to some extent, but it's honestly not even really a Hu Tao team because you could actually put any pyro on-field DPS in it and it'll work absolutely perfectly fine. So I guess at the end of the day, the funny thing is that when I first got Hu Tao years ago, I really thought that I would enjoy playing her a lot, but she ended up being probably one of my bigger regrets on my account. But what's never a regret is subscribing to the channel. Did you know that 92% of y'all haven't subscribed yet? So don't forget to go and hit that subscribe button and ring that bell, because we're going to be continuing with the Xilonen series right after this, where we continue to look at other teams that Xilonen is really good at. So hitting that subscribe button and ringing that bell will mean that you are notified when the next video comes out. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about Hu Tao. Hu Tao's last rerun was in version 4.1, and since then we've had quite a few new characters that work pretty decently with her, so at least there's that. Especially with the top picks of someone like Xianyun, who basically turns anyone into a plunge DPS. This is precisely the singular team for Hu Tao that I actually enjoy. So there we go. This is why I call Hu Tao Pyro Zhao. That, and I will probably never bother getting Zhao anymore because I have Hu Tao. So that's basically the dynamic that I'm working with at the present moment. The other characters that are really good with Hu Tao include someone like Farina, who provides obviously the very nice Hydro application and damage percent buff from her ult, and therefore you can play double Hydro with something like Yelan Farina as opposed to Xingqiu Yelan. If you don't have Yelan, then you can of course play Xingqiu Farina. It's a little bit sus, but either way, Hu Tao does benefit a lot from having Farina in the game. And finally, I just mentioned her, there's Xilonen. Xilonen is essentially the Kazahar who heals, but more importantly for Hu Tao teams, she's the Kazahar that actually works without having to bring a second pyro character. So that way you can actually play things like Xilonen in a double Hydro team, which means you can actually have a much more smoother experience with Hu Tao and Xilonen. Now, there are some sort of optional, dare I say, slightly outdated picks. Even though they're brand new, they're kind of outdated. I'm mainly referring to something like Chiori and or Kachina, because I think double Geo Hu Tao teams are very outdated and not popular anymore. So that's kind of not really a thing that exists, but I do want to just mention that those are alternatives if you are into double Geo for some reason. And I do want to also mention that Chevy exists now. Overload Hu Tao is a thing. It's entirely possible to play, but I guess it's not really that popular. I would imagine that there are less Overload Hu Tao players than there are actual Aloy mains, for example. And also, Emily is a character who showed up in the game, which means that, you know, we're starting to see more burn vape, burn melt shenanigans. So you can do that with Hu Tao. Will you, though? Probably not. As a general rule, Hu Tao's entire kit makes her really potent in her own vaporized damage. Hu Tao's main competition these days is of course a DPS pyro on-fielding polearm character, and it's important that we're talking about on-fielders because it's not Xiangling. We're talking about Arlecchino. Now, spreadsheet impact players have told me in varying ways that Hu Tao is at least slightly more DPS than Arlecchino, but I have heard other spreadsheet impact players reckon that Arlecchino is more DPS than Hu Tao, to the point where Arlecchino is one of the top 3 DPSs in the game. So I don't know which one's which. I don't know what's actually true, whether Hu Tao does more DPS than Arlecchino, but at the end of the day, it actually doesn't matter. Because what really matters is that one character feels better to play than the other, and that is why I think Arlecchino is just better than Hu Tao. Because Arlecchino is just much more of a straightforward character, and yeah, she does have that interesting, unique twist of not being able to be healed by other characters, you know, the Deathwing passive from Heroes of the Storm. At the end of the day, I just find Arlecchino's gameplay to just be much more engaging. On top of that, Hu Tao has an A4 passive, which gives her a bunch of damage percent so long as she remains below half health. The problem is, these days, her most popular teams involve Farina and a healer, which basically means that her A4 passive is practically non-existent. We used to lambast someone who also had a passive that was completely useless. That person was also a pyro on-fielder, and his name was Diluc. So nobody does charge attacks with Dilucs anymore, and I get the feeling that nobody's really going to be able to make use of the below half health passive with Hu Tao anymore. So yeah, she's got that, which is kind of cringe. Yeah, I said it. So like I mentioned, there's only one team that I recommend with Hu Tao, and that's going to be Plunge, i.e. Pyro Xiao. So let's have a look at it. We're here with Hu Tao and Snorlax. So you can do this with Farina, you can do this with Yelan. Yelan is a little bit more, I guess, controlled, if you will. Controlled Hydro app, which can be really nice. We don't need to use Xilonen's ult or anything because we already have, you know, Xianyun's ult. So instead of doing like dash cancels, or jump cancels from the charge attack, I'm actually doing a sort of jump cancel of Hu Tao's normal attacks. So yeah, it's just as memey, and sometimes I can screw it up and accidentally cause a pyro aura on the enemy. So that's something we try to avoid, but as long as it works out, it usually works out perfectly fine. I suppose if you're going to run Farina instead, then you don't have to worry about normal attack cancelling. You can just try and use your... Like, there's a way of using normal attacks with spears to try and cancel the sort of stun or the stalling that happens after you do a plunge with someone like Hu Tao. I think this plunge doesn't necessarily exist with someone like Xiao, so that's a little bit special about him. But for other spear characters, there's that tiny pause before you can plunge again, and you can cancel that with a normal attack as well. Just keep in mind that at the end of the day, yeah, I'm doing this with Hu Tao, and I'm personally choosing to do this mainly with Hu Tao. But there is another pyro character that does this better and does more damage with this, and that's Diluc. Because his plunge multipliers are just the highest in the game, I think. For some bloody reason, right? I have a C6 R4 Diluc. Purely by accident. Okay? And even with like the team that I was demonstrated here, my C6 R4 Diluc ends up doing 170k plunges. So yeah, just as a bit of perspective, that's kind of what we're dealing with. Has anything changed with Hu Tao in terms of her builds? No. Basically, as a general rule, apparently Crimson Witch is still popular, but I remain mostly unconvinced by this because part of its passive is not really utilized, so I don't really like that. But apparently the Spreadsheet Impact nerds reckon it's better, but I don't know. I personally still run Xianyun hours, and it works perfectly fine for me. In fact, because we now play with a lot of healers and, well, Farina, the energy reduction part of Xianyun hours is actually not that big of a problem, because what am I going to use Hu Tao's ult for? Damage? I don't really rely on Hu Tao's ult for damage, because I rely on Hu Tao's plunges for damage instead. So yeah, losing that ult, i.e. losing the self-heal that comes from that ult, not that important in the long run. Now, in terms of Hu Tao's weapons, most DPS spears will work fine, but Staff of Homeless is no longer that essential, in my opinion, because you're going to find yourself mostly healed. It's the same logic as her A4 not being all that utilized. So, as a general rule, I feel like her 4-star spears are actually the most value at the end of the day. Like, yeah, you'll probably still do more damage with Staff of Homeless, but for all of those primos to get Staff of Homeless, seems not worth it. So, if you're going to spend that much, I reckon you might as well have a crack at going for a Battle Pass spear instead, because Ballad of the Fjords seems really, really good, right? And even with an EM stand, like, despite the fact that you're basically overcapping on EM, it still seems to outperform Deathmatch, at least in my experience, so that's something to check out. So when it comes to Hu Tao's artifact substats, it's going to really depend on the weapon you choose. That's why I'm going to leave it until now to tell you that if you're running a weapon that has an HP buff, then run EM Sands. If you're running a weapon that has an EM buff, run an HP Sand. If neither, then I guess have a look at what team you're playing, but maybe stick to HP. Just figure it out, because EM Sands in HP Sands are really, really good because you don't have ICD on plunges, so that's why EM is just as important. With the cups, it's usually Pyro cups, but I guess if you're playing with Hu Tao, you do have an opportunity to have a crack at running HP or EM cups, so we have a chance there. And then when it comes to your hat, it's usually crit. I don't think I've come across any scenario where HP EM hats suddenly become a good idea. I don't think Hu Tao is really that kind of character that could give her that much crit that suddenly you have diminishing returns there. I also want to mention that if you do decide to actually go for that weird burning team with someone like Emily, then obviously Lumidos Elegy becomes an option, but you probably want to be putting Lumidos Elegy on Emily first. That was a bit of a tongue twister before you start doing that kind of meme with someone like Hu Tao. And finally, when it comes to Hu Tao's constellations, here's the deal. Back in the day, C1 used to actually be meaningful because people would do dash cancels in order to save on their stamina, right? But because we now have an option of playing something like Xianyun, and that's the only team that I enjoy with Hu Tao, C1 is practically useless to me because I'm going to be jumping anyway, so I might as well just stay at C0 and do not even jump cancels, because I don't even bother with charge attacks anymore with Hu Tao. That's kind of where I'm at with her. So yeah, if you're not into plunge gameplay, then yeah, I suppose C1 is good. C2 is mostly useless as far as I can tell. In fact, it might steal vapes. C3 is good if you really want to go there, but C5 is generally useless, especially if you're playing with a healer, especially if you're playing with Farina, so there we go. C4 is cute, but I don't think it's really that important, and then C6 is the funny one that it allows your Hu Tao to do a lot more damage, but again, it's a C6, so are you really going to go for that? Probably not. Yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, Hu Tao's constellations went from having a stopping point to honestly being completely worthless. So that's kind of hilarious that Hu Tao's teams have seemingly been buffed, I guess, and I would say that Hu Tao's overall damage these days in these new teams is higher, but her constellations have been made just the more redundant. So that's Hu Tao. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, if you're still unsure, I would recommend waiting for Marvelika or the inevitable Arlecchino rerun, because I would say they're probably going to end up being a much better experience than Hu Tao. Like, there is a reason why I haven't bothered leveling up Hu Tao to level 90. You should, but I just don't have the time or the energy to bother with that. And I know some people may comment and say, oh, you just like Arlecchino because she's new, blah, 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 blah. I'm a Lisa main. That's the end of that discussion right there. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Are you someone who's going to go and get Hu Tao? Because I guess you want to get Hu Tao. Let me know in the comments. How do you feel as well about the Hu Tao Arlecchino competition? Again, I land on the side of Arlecchino because I just think she feels a lot better to play. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact content, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye!